Welcome back, everybody, to the Peer-to-Peer Policy Pod. I'm Brian Morgenstern here with Zach Whiting. Remember to follow me on X at MorgensternNJ, like and subscribe to the pod. I am headed to Vegas for the Bitcoin conference. Texas advances its own state strategic Bitcoin reserve, and the Senate shakes the tree and out pops a stablecoin bill. Lots to discuss this week. Zach, where should we start?
All right, well, let's start right here in Austin, Texas, and we'll talk about the Texas Strategic Bitcoin Reserve. There was a lot of hype at the beginning of session. There was a lot of back and forth during session. Texas finally, in the House, they finally passed SB 21, the bill to establish a strategic Bitcoin reserve in Texas. The House vote was 100-142, so broad support. Because it was amended, it now heads to a conference committee so they can resolve their differences. But there's great champions in Senator Charles Schwertner and Representative Giovanni Capriglione. So a big shout out to both of them. So, Brian, this bill was a slam dunk, but it encountered some hiccups along the way. As the graphic said, Texas was going for bronze, which Texas does not like to go for bronze in anything. But can you walk us through some of the drama that unfolded during the committee process? And more importantly, can you tell us, just big picture, why is a strategic Bitcoin reserve in a state like Texas so important?
Yeah, so in the committee in the House, we thought this was going to sail through without a hitch. And then some members got cold feet. And we believe it was some of the fiscal hawks, who, I think were pretty fiscally hawkish, but they didn't want to spend money on anything, including a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And so we had to mobilize voters. I think the chairman, Representative Capriglione, had to mobilize members and had to kind of right the ship to get this thing back on track. And we explained that this is actually fiscally very responsible because the US dollar has lost 35% of its value over the last decade, while Bitcoin has increased by about 45,000%. So this is a very good investment because there's a supply cap on Bitcoin and virtually unlimited demand, which is a recipe for price appreciation. It helps the state diversify against dollar volatility and against spending maybe by the federal government or monetary policy that the state doesn't necessarily have control over. This helps the state stabilize its economic situation. So this is very fiscally responsible. Uh, our Bitcoin voter project, which is something I'm proud to be involved in, reached out to voters across the state, got them to call their representative, and help them understand that this is important to voters. It's important to Bitcoiners, and it's good for the state of Texas. And so we got the train back on the tracks, got it through the House. Now I think there's some technical differences they'll work out in a conference committee, but it seems to have plenty of support to pass this session and make it to the governor's desk. And we hope that while maybe Texas wasn't the first to actually pass a bill to establish a reserve, it may be the first to fund a reserve. And I think that's kind of the next milestone that we're looking towards. But exciting stuff happening in Texas.
It is, and I watched the debate on the floor, and there's a couple things that stand out to me. I put on my hat as a former lawmaker, and this is why it's important that you have champions that are good and understand the issue because it's going to take a lot of work. Not bad, but it's going to take a lot of work for Chairman Capriglione and Senator Schwertner, to take it out of committee, get it through committee, get it off the floor, come back, all those things. It's good that you have somebody that's committed to the bill and not just saying, well, it died in committee, let's move on with it. And the other piece too, with that funding piece is there's the question of, is this good as a matter of public policy? Yes, absolutely. And then there's a separate question of funding it. So I'm glad that whatever the number is, they end up funding it, whatever funds they fund it with and to what number is one thing, but getting this bill to the governor's desk and signed is great. And one other thing that was cool in the debate on the House floor is Chair Capriglione moved to suspend a rule to, on the floor during the layout, add something like 26 joint sponsors and co-sponsors. And a lot of those people were folks that were reached out to by the Bitcoin Voter Project. So that was very cool to see the mobilization of Texans and the effort of a group like BVP to help move the needle on that. So that was very encouraging. All right.
Bitcoiners are passionate, baby. When when you unleash them, good
They
things
are,
happen.
and there'll be a lot of energy enthusiasm we'll talk about later in another segment at the conference coming up here next week. All right, let's leave the great state of Texas, and we'll get our passports to go to Washington D.C. and the stablecoin bill. So last week we talked about some of the hiccups and another what was a slam dunk bill encountered some resistance last week, but after it dramatically failed a procedural vote, the Senate crossed the 60 vote threshold on two procedural votes this week on the stablecoin bill or the Genius Act. So it clears the way for it to be considered on the floor and on the merits. So, Brian, what is a stablecoin? What's the Genius Act? And why is this bill important?
So a stable coin is a digital token that is pegged to the value of the US dollar. Um, the reason why these are popular really around the world is that it can allow people who maybe are unbanked or underbanked to transact using essentially US dollars with fast, secure, cheaper transactions. And it's viewed, I think, politically as sort of a layup. It's like the easiest of the issues regarding crypto because the Treasury Secretary has said this is going to increase demand for the US dollar, help strengthen its position as the world reserve currency, and it'll deepen the liquidity of the market for US debt, which is important when you have, I don't know, $36 trillion worth of it. So it was held up, I think, a little bit for cynical reasons because uh, the president and his family are involved with World Liberty Financial, which has crypto products. They are launching a stable coin. And so I think the Democrats wanted to attack the president um, for his businesses involvement in this sector, and so they held it up. They got a few, I think, policy concessions or changes that they were asking for, but I think this was more about politics than it was about policy and holding it up for about a week. And I think the fact that it was held up for a couple of news cycles and then passed anyway might prove my theory a little bit. So I think that's kind of what happened, but it's a positive step. Senator Haggerty was a big leader on this issue. Senator Lummis was a leader on this issue. Um, we're glad that Senator Gillibrand was able to help lead on this and whip some Democrats onto the bill so that it passed with very strong bipartisan support. That's a great thing. So that, in a nutshell, is how we got to where we are today, and we've got yet another step towards bipartisan consensus, hopefully, on Bitcoin and crypto issues. So big week.
That is a big week. And one of the things that has been a theme through these episodes, including our last our episode last week, is there's a lot of these issues that are intertwined. So you have the stablecoin bill, what we talked about just the last few minutes, what's happening in one chamber at one level. You have the market structure bill, you have reconciliation. How does this kind of big picture, how does it all fit together? And is Congress, are they taking up the bills in the right order? The Senate's going one direction, the House going another direction. What is what's the kind of lay of the land and what how is Congress doing? Could they be doing this better? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think they should have moved faster on the strategic Bitcoin reserve. Now we're seeing Bitcoin hit an all-time high. Um, there are drawdowns frequently in Bitcoin. Maybe there'll be another opportunity in the future to get this done and help the US establish a return at a more affordable price, or establish a reserve at a more affordable price. But if I had my druthers, they would have focused first on the Bitcoin Act and then moved to these other bills, the Genius Act and the Market Structure Bill. Reason being that some of the biggest problems were caused really by the regulators during the Biden administration, uh, which are no longer very hostile to the industry. They're not doing regulation by enforcement the way they were doing it in the past. And so I think the urgency is a little bit less on stablecoins and market structure, although both still important. Um, but the way they set up their agenda, I think, was very much based on how the Biden administration approached these issues. And so they just stuck with that order. So they're going to do stablecoins first, then a market structure bill where they define jurisdiction for the SEC and CFTC and define what these assets are, what's a security, what's a commodity, what's just a collectible digital token, uh, and some other utility tokens, some other things like that. Um, so starting with stable coins, then they'll go to market structure, then the Bitcoin Act. I just kind of wish they would reverse that and do Bitcoin first, but it is what it is. Um, Reconciliation, of course, sweeping bill dealing with tax issues, trying to preserve most of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act with some other sweeteners in there. No tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, no tax on overtime. Um, Adjusting some things like the salt cap. Uh, there are some Bitcoin issues that we hope will get into reconciliation. The Senate is going to have a crack at that because the House just passed their one big beautiful bill by a single vote, and now it's the Senate's turn to play with it and hopefully come up with something that both chambers will be able to pass. And we hope that there's some Bitcoin provisions in there, like treating Bitcoin as a commodity, because everybody seems to recognize that it is, for tax purposes, which would be very helpful, simplify the system, help some of our companies not have to sell Bitcoin just to pay taxes, things like that. Um, Maybe a de minimis exemption so that you're not filing tax forms every time you pay for a cup of coffee with Bitcoin. There's some things that we want to see done. We're hopeful that that happens. If that doesn't happen in reconciliation, perhaps we'll get a crack at market structure. I don't know. But all these very big moving parts are swirling around Capitol Hill, and we're doing our best to be a part of that conversation. So lots of stuff happening. Uh, that was probably about as clear as mud, but that's more of a fact problem than a communication problem, I think, as we say.
Well, there's always, there's always drama, there's always excitement on Capitol Hill, but it was an encouraging thing to wake up this morning and have, 15 emails and news alerts about the big beautiful bill passing, and it moves the needle forward. A lot of good things in that bill, and hopefully they'll continue to improve it as it goes over to the Senate, and maybe address some of those Bitcoin related questions that we've been discussing. And if you want to learn more, tune into last week's episode where Brian did a little deeper dive on some of those sort of three discrete tax and policy issues on Bitcoin. All right, we'll transition over to so we've flown from the capital, Austin, Texas, to the capital, Washington, D.C., and now we're going to fly to the entertainment capital of the world, Las Vegas, Nevada. The next week is the world's largest Bitcoin event. The Bitcoin conference is in Las Vegas. Brian, you'll be there along with tens of thousands of other Bitcoiners. So last year you were on two panels at the conference. A lot has changed since last year, and we'll get to that in a moment. But last year, what were your panels about? How did they go? But how was the conference overall?
Well, the panels, okay, I will get to the panels in just a second. First, I want to talk about the lead up to last year's conference and how it marked a sea change for the industry, really. So, Dylan, can you throw up that tweet by Don Jr., if you have it handy? Yeah, Trump is the best choice for Bitcoin. So I wrote that article for Bitcoin Magazine, which was the most heavily trafficked article, most highly read, highly viewed article ever in the history of Bitcoin Magazine, which is saying something because they have a huge readership all around the world. Don Jr. tweeted it out. Ultimately, the president ended up truth socialing it out, and it got huge traction. We then met with the president, talked to him about Bitcoin issues. He got very excited about them, understands why people want alternatives to the legacy financial system. We talked to him about the energy issues around Bitcoin. Of course, he wants energy dominance for the United States. And ultimately, at last year's conference, which was in Nashville, not Vegas, but Nashville, President Trump came to the conference and declared that he wants the United States to be the Bitcoin superpower of the world and the crypto capital of the planet. and he outlined a number of policy proposals during his campaign for president that we supported. And we said this will help you uh, get votes from Bitcoiners. This will help marry good politics with good policy and help the United States succeed. He agreed with us. He gave this speech, which got a standing ovation multiple times, including when he said that he was going to fire Gary Gensler. And everyone leapt out of their chairs and screamed and yelled and hooted and hollered. And he liked that reaction so much that he delivered the line again. And again, everybody jumped out of their chair and went nuts. So that was a huge event, sea change, getting a then former president and candidate for president to come to the Bitcoin conference and announce his Bitcoin policy proposals. It was really historic, I think. Um, Now, to the less exciting issue of my panels, they were pretty interesting, actually. So we talked about Bitcoin Voter Project and how we were mobilizing Bitcoin voters and about how they could have a profound impact on the election, which they did. So our data shows that we helped swing Pennsylvania for Trump and for Senator McCormick because they both embraced pro-Bitcoin policies. In fact, CNN just reported recently that Bitcoin and crypto voters may have decided the election in swing states, which is not that hard to imagine when you think 50 plus million Americans hold these assets and they're voting with their pocketbooks. And the elections historically have been swung by tens of thousands of votes across a handful of swing states. Uh, CNN's own data shows that these issues that Trump really dove into could have made the difference in the election. So we talked about the Bitcoin Voter Project on one panel, and then the nation state game theory. It all goes back to Satoshi's wise words. You might want to get some Bitcoin just in case it catches on. With a supply capped asset uh, and unlimited demand, that's why it's uh, counter-inflationary. That's why it is the modern day precious metal, except that it can be transferred anywhere in the world cheaply, quickly, securely. So it's even more useful. And so we talked about if the United States starts accumulating Bitcoin to strengthen its balance sheet, every G7, G20 country, and really every country in the world is then going to have to follow suit. It's really firing a starting gun for this space race for Bitcoin. So another very interesting panel as well. There'll be really high level, interesting conversations at this conference. Both Trump's sons, Eric and Don, will be there in Vegas. The Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, will be there. In his disclosures as a senator, he disclosed, I think he might be holding the most or among the most Bitcoin of any elected official. So he's got skin in the game. He understands the value of this. There might be one more graphic just showing what to expect at this year's Bitcoin conference in Vegas. So Dylan, we can throw that one up. There you go. The vice president right in the middle, Don and Eric, our buddy David Bailey, of course, CEO of Bitcoin Magazine. We have Saylor, the ultimate hype man for Bitcoin, crypto czar David Sachs, Jack Mallers, Senator Lummis, luminaries from around this space, who all of whom want the United States to succeed uh, at Bitcoin and crypto and help us to maintain a dominant economic position in the world. So it will be very interesting. I'm going to try to broadcast live with our friend Dylan here at the Rumble's operation there at Bitcoin Vegas. Very excited. Hopefully we'll be able to rope some people in and chat with us about what's going on, and we'll have a nice little broadcast for all of you when we are there. Very excited for it. So we'll see you next week.
And that picture that showed the 8 or 10 people that are going to be there. If you go to the website, it is an amazing list. I mean, the list is this long on the website of people that will be speaking and panels that they'll be hosting. So I'm not able to go this year. I have to make sure that everything we have a smooth landing with the Texas legislative session and the Nevada legislative session, which we're keeping an eye on. But I hope y'all have a great time, and that's exciting. And the president, we talk sometimes he's the ultimate hype man for things. And I always go back and think that was his pro wrestling training, that he learned a lot of that from Vince McMahon and from WWE. But the theatrics of it aside, it was promises made, promises kept. So he can hype up the crowd and say, we're going to fire Gary Gensler. Promises made, promises kept. He's got new leadership in there at the SEC, who's really, I think, thoughtfully approaching some of these things. So tune in, and we'll see. And for everyone that does get a chance to go to the Bitcoin conference next week, enjoy it. Have a great time. All right, we will transition over to the final segment, and we'll conclude with the grab bag segment. I'll start on that, and I want to wish my son a happy 9th birthday. It was last week, his birthday. He wanted to go to SeaWorld and swim with beluga whales and feed sea lions. And so that's exactly what we did. And we were joking before we started. This is just the stock photo from the website. The other photos that we had just weren't quite as exciting and dramatic. But that is exactly what it was like. You go in there and you throw them fish, and they do tricks, and they give you a little kiss on the cheek, and then the beluga waves goodbye to you and splashes you in the face in freezing cold water, and it was a lot of fun. So
That's
I had a
very
great
cool.
time and glad we got to do that.
Yeah, I was gonna say you have much better hair in the stock photo, I think.
I
Yeah,
do, I
that
do.
guy has he used Pert Plus or something. That is some
Yes.
very strong hair. But no, that's great. What a good birthday present. You're a good dad. I hope he had an absolute blast there. I'm sure that is something that I would like to bring my daughter to someday. So happy birthday, Jeff.
Thank you.
Um, I have a couple items for the grab bag this week. Also, feel good stories of the week. Uh, One, everybody loves a good listicle, and I was honored to be one of Washingtonian Magazine's most influential people shaping policy this year. A very nice honor. And so at the reception, I was able to get a copy of the magazine made with my face on it. That is not a real magazine, but it is a keepsake, and I'll hang that up somewhere in my house, I guess. I don't know where else to put it. But it was a very nice reception, met a lot of very smart people who are doing the Lord's work here in Washington. We also had a very fun event at George Washington's house, Mount Vernon, his estate. I went with my wife and daughter and Dougie Larry, and that is us down at George Washington's Pier. He has um, a dock there where a boat takes people to and from the estate if you want to travel by boat. And so we took a picture there on the dock. And we also saw a foxhounds demonstration, some colonial fanfare, and lots of doggies, which makes us very happy. So that was a really fun event. And thanks to Mount Vernon for everything they do to preserve the history of the founding of the United States. So I think that's all for this week's episode. We were very efficient this week, but we covered a lot of ground. Hope you all enjoyed it. Again, follow me on Twitter at MorganSternNJ. Like and subscribe to the show, and we'll be seeing you from the Bitcoin conference in Las Vegas very soon. So thanks again for tuning in. We'll see you next time on the Peer to Peer Policy Pod.